history is often painted with the colors of gold, steel, and crimson, the standard palette of kings, crusaders, and conquerors who shaped the world through decree and blade. When we think of the great nobles of the Holy Roman Empire, we imagine them in the splendor of their courtly attire, surrounded by the stone walls of cathedrals and the echoes of sacred hymns. We expect their ends to be as grand as their lives, falling in the heat of a righteous crusade or passing peacefully in a silken bed surrounded by heirs. But history, as we record here at Last Breath Records, possesses a cruel and often stomach-turning sense of irony. In the summer of 1184, the pinnacle of German aristocracy gathered for what was supposed to be a standard political assembly, a meeting of minds to settle the disputes of the realm. These were counts, dukes, and bishops, men whose chains of office carried the weight of divine authority. Yet, they would not find their last breath on a field of glory. Instead, they would meet an end so undignified and so horrific that it remains one of the most disturbing footnotes in medieval history. This is the archival record of the Erfurt Latrine disaster, a day when the weight of power literally crushed the floor of the sacred, plunging the elite into a 12-foot pit of human waste. The disaster began with a political crisis. King Henry VI, the young and ambitious ruler of the Holy Roman Empire, had summoned high-ranking aristocrats to the Church of St. Peter in Erfurt. The assembly was not for prayer, but for the hard, grinding business of medieval governance. A heated dispute had broken out between the Landgrave of Thuringia and the Archbishop of Mainz, a conflict that threatened the stability of the region. To resolve this, the elite of medieval German society were called to witness and deliberate: counts, dukes, royal advisors, and the highest officials of the church. They gathered in the church annex, a sturdy-looking stone structure that had been originally constructed to house visiting clergy. Because the discussions were of such vital importance, more and more people crowded into the second-floor meeting room. The room was narrow and confined, never designed to hold the combined mass of 60 heavily armored and elaborately dressed men of status. As the afternoon sun beat down on July 26th, the air inside grew thick with the tension of political maneuvering and the heat of the gathering crowd. While the nobles focused on the disputes above, a silent threat lay directly beneath their feet. The meeting room was situated on the second floor, supported by heavy oak beams spanning the stone walls. In the 12th century, architecture was often a blend of grand aesthetics and primitive engineering. Beneath this specific floor was something unusual for a religious building of that era: a massive centralized latrine pit. Unlike the common system of portable chamber pots used in most castles, this building featured an early experimental form of indoor plumbing. The cesspit below had been designed to collect human waste from a primitive toilet system used by church officials over the span of decades. By the time the nobles gathered in 1184, the pit had filled with decomposing excrement, creating a noxious, liquefied pool approximately 12 feet deep. It was a stagnant ocean of waste, hidden from view, but waiting for a single structural failure to transform it into a tomb. At approximately 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the discussions reached a fever pitch. The combined weight of the nobility, their heavy ceremonial daggers, and their thick, multi-layered court dress began to exert a pressure the oak beams could no longer sustain. Without warning, the overloaded floor gave way. Witnesses later recorded a sound like a clap of thunder as the wooden beams splintered with a tremendous crack. In an instant, the floor vanished beneath the feet of the assembly. 60 men, the very cream of the Holy Roman Empire, suddenly plunged through the collapsing structure. They did not fall into a basement or onto a solid floor. They fell directly into the 12-foot deep sea of decomposing human waste. For some of the nobles, death came with the initial impact. As the floor gave way, the stone debris from the walls and the massive oak beams fell with the men. The weight of the timber and stone crushed skulls and broke necks instantly upon contact with the bottom of the pit. These were, in a grim sense, the lucky ones. Most of the aristocrats, however, found themselves alive but submerged in the liquefied human excrement. The pit was narrow, and the sudden influx of 60 grown men created a chaotic, entangled mass of bodies. As they struggled to orient themselves in the pitch darkness of the cesspit, the weight of those falling on top of them pushed the initial victims deeper into the filth. The true horror of the Erfurt disaster lies in the physiological details of the struggle. The men were dressed in their finest court attire: heavy brocaded fabrics, layered silks, and thick woolens adorned with metal chains of office. As they hit the liquid waste, these heavy fabrics immediately began to absorb the liquefied excrement. Within seconds, their clothing became a massive weight, acting like an anchor that made it impossible to swim or even stay afloat. In a standard drowning, a victim fights for air and water. Here, they were fighting for breath in a noxious pool of decomposing organic matter. As the nobles panicked, they gasped for air but instead inhaled the toxic fumes and the liquid waste itself. The narrow opening of the pit and the pile of debris above them prevented any easy escape. The more they struggled, the deeper they sank into the putrid mass. Witnesses outside the pit described hearing screams that gradually diminished as the nobles were systematically overcome by the environment. The process of suffocation was slow and agonizing. Their lungs filled with the liquefied waste, and the high concentration of methane and other decomposition gases likely contributed to rapid disorientation and loss of consciousness. Those who were not immediately submerged found themselves trapped in a confined space where the weight of other bodies continued to press them down. Escape was a biological impossibility for many. By the time rescuers were able to organize a response and begin the process of dredging the pit, all but a few of the 60 nobles had perished. They died in their finest court attire, symbols of earthly power defeated by the most basic of human biological realities. The disaster did not claim everyone. In a bizarre twist of fate, King Henry VI survived the collapse. At the moment the floor gave way, he was reportedly sitting in a stone-walled window niche or on a section of the floor, supported by the thicker, primary stone walls of the annex. He was forced to cling to the window frame as the floor disappeared beside him, watching his entire political assembly vanish into the dark abyss below. The Archbishop of Mainz also survived, having been positioned in a similarly sturdy part of the room. For these survivors, the psychological trauma was immense. They were the few witnesses to a tragedy that erased an entire generation of German leadership in a matter of minutes. They were eventually rescued using ladders, pulled from the edge of a pit that had consumed their peers. For those few who were pulled out of the cesspit alive, the nightmare did not end with their rescue. Medieval medicine had no understanding of the bacterial hazards contained within such a pit. The survivors had spent significant time submerged in and ingesting toxic waste. Historical records indicate that many who were saved that afternoon died in the following days and weeks. They succumbed to massive internal infections and the effects of ingesting the decomposing matter. Their deaths were slow, marked by fever and agonizing abdominal trauma, a lingering reminder of the 12-foot tomb they had briefly escaped. The Erfurt Latrine disaster remains a unique entry in the annals of history because of its supreme irony. It serves as a reminder that the structures we build, both political and architectural, are only as strong as their foundations. The man who had faced countless battlefields and political assassins was defeated by nothing more than an overloaded floor and a pit of waste. At Last Breath Records, we look at this disaster not as a moment of comedy, but as a record of the fragility of the human condition. Those 60 nobles began their day in the pursuit of power and ended it in the most profound darkness imaginable. Their last breath was not a prayer in a cathedral, but a struggle in the dark, a wet, suffocating end that history has never been able to wash away. The Church of St. Peter still stands as a testament to this dark day, though the floor and the pit have long since been remediated. The names of the 60 nobles are etched in the chronicles, a permanent list of those who learned that even the most ashen status cannot protect a man from the laws of physics and the realities of the physical world. Thank you for joining us for this archival look at one of the most undignified ends in history. If you have the stomach for more of the painful past, stay tuned to Last Breath Records for our next entry into the annals of agony.